Hi, it's iBookBinding's podcast. Today is a bit unusual because we have two guests who agreed to talk to us, and both of them are, among other things, as far as I understand, paper conservators. The first one is Angelina Bakalarou. Hi, Angelina. And the second one is Ashleigh Brown. Hi, Ashleigh.
Hi.
I'm not sure about first and second, but it's just, the order in which papers were laying nearby. So it's very nice to have you. And my co-host is Pavel. He joins us from Moscow. And yeah, I'm Stepan.
Hi, everyone.
So it's really the first time we have somebody as a guest who are not really working with books as their main, as their main job. So you maybe have some projects that are related to books or bookish objects, but as far as I understand, your main field is conservation of paper objects in general. So I suppose it's mostly notebooks.
No, actually, you'd be surprised.
No?
We do come across a lot of paper material in book form or in folio form. Probably most notably, last year we had a really big project, really big urgent project to do that was maps, very large scale maps, 100 of them and spread across 4 folios. And that's kind of a lot of things come in book form that aren't just notebooks, and a lot of times we get very big things. so yeah.
So I assume that those kind of projects you can't do from home, because what I saw in paper conservation videos, you often use baths to wash your paper. Yeah, and that should be at least as big as the object.
Washing is not always necessary, but yeah, generally you need to have space to be able to wash that, and often a sink.
Yes. There are some fun, clever ways of getting around that kind of stuff, especially with large things, because you'd be surprised how big paper objects can get, especially when people are kind of attaching pieces together to make even larger pieces. So it's definitely something that, it's quite a logistical issue. But yes, a lot of this has to be done with space. It can't just be in a confined area.
And what about the time frame? I mean, from most of the materials you work with, I assume, are not modern, so they are at least, say, 100 years old. But how much older do they get? Paper appeared like 900 years ago in Europe.
Well, in Europe, not in Europe, it's like 2000 years or something.
That's actually a really good question. I'm trying to think of what the oldest thing is that we've worked on. Obviously, yes, paper spans, nearly 1,000 years at this point. But I think the stuff that we work on is actually even more modern than 100 years old. I mean, you'd be surprised the amount of damage that modern papers endure, especially. But I guess the oldest thing would be, for me at least, was 1600s drawings, and very notably currency in the US. So like some of the earliest currencies. But I think, Angie, you probably would have worked with older things.
Oh, I don't remember. I mean, during studying in Greece, we did work on some quite old material, but it was so many years ago I can't even remember. But it's generally 19th century items that are more common that you can find and that you can work with. But I honestly have no recollection of the dates back then.
And what kind of things are we talking about? Georgian ephemera and stuff?
I think Victorian as well. A lot of Victorian. I mean, I think I was going to add to that the bulk of the things that we get are 19th century and probably mid 20th century, because that's where you see the biggest shift in materials used to make paper. And most of the materials used to make paper during those time periods were not long lasting. So higher lignin content in paper in the 19th century, mid 19th century, when they had the manufacturing process, industrialization of paper making. And then in the I'd say like 30s to 50s, you have this increase of plasticizers, of brighteners, of all these different types of chemical things you can add to paper to make them really like clean and smooth and flashy, but unfortunately doesn't make them last very long and makes them really susceptible to damage. So
it creates a whole other
whole other mess that happens from that. Oh God, yeah.
I guess in bookmaking, we can see a sort of decline in quality starting the late 19th century when mass-produced books started to appear, and paper industry, of course, was part of this process. And at some moment, industry wanted to make paper cheaper and cheaper, and I guess this also influences on the durability of the materials and on toughness of your work when you need to recover the materials.
The word conservation presumes in the modern world as little intervention with the object as possible. So I assume the field no longer artificially whitens the documents as they used to. So you mostly prevent further deterioration. You don't make the object look artificially better.
I think this is always the question that I think creates such like turmoil amongst conservators, particularly of paper, because I think it's such an ephemeral at times material. It's super durable sometimes, and sometimes it's incredibly fragile. And so we're very much, constantly talking with all stakeholders, be them like private clients or institutions that we've worked with who, they have expectations of things looking amazing. And I'm sure you find this with books as well, where it's like, I thought it was going to look like a brand new book. And you're like, nope, it's still an old book. So it's constantly this issue. But the trend in our field, the ethics, the trend in our ethics is really to do as minimal intervention as possible. With that in mind, there is, of course, the fact that whoever owns it does have a say in the treatment. So there is definitely a defining line where we say, this is how much conservation will do. And if they want us to go further, we're like, well, you're going to have to accept that that's now restoration if you are so adamant. But here are the reasons why we don't think you should do that. And if they still want to do that, then, I mean, we're kind of hard pressed to tell the owner of the object that they're not allowed to do something. So there's a lot of like steps in how that goes. But
this should be hard, telling the owner that he cannot do something with their object.
Yeah.
That's the issues with private conservation at times, that when you're dealing with someone that owns something and they come to you, they often want it to look perfect. But
and I wouldn't say just private. I mean, there's definitely been cases that we've come across. I know I've definitely come across with institutions who there are people within the institutions who don't understand the limits of how far we should go. But in those instances, we definitely can say no. It feels better to say no to them because you're like, you should know better.
no, that's fine.
Yeah.
And the ethics in your field has been developing rather rapidly, because only, say, 20 years ago, museums would go to such lengths at presenting their objects as beautiful as possible, that they crossed many lines that we have today.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was like, it's been developing a lot late. I mean, the past 10, 20 years, yeah. And I think the worst time, I don't want to say this, I shouldn't say this. No, I was thinking about the 80s when conservation first started like happening. And there's so many questionable things that happened. However, we can't judge them that harshly, because it was a different time. There were not all the research and all the science and all the chemistry behind what we do, like hadn't developed as much, and they didn't know as much. So now when we look back at decisions made like 30 years ago or more, there's a bit of a cringing moment, but we can but things have changed and have developed so much. So, and we're also, like, I think the way that we work at the moment has to reflect the fact that people 20 years from now might still be cringing at what we are doing right now. So we have to consider like the reversibility of what we do, and the retaining original parts of the object without cleaning too much, because there's like one of the most important things right now is that, why do you remove the dust? Why are you dusting things? Why are you removing this? Because dust contains so much information about the object. So you're basically altering the object itself, whether it be paper or whatever. I mean, this is throughout conservation. So there's a lot of new things that we have to think about, and also considering materiality of the object itself, or the paper that you're using. It's just growing and growing more and more. So we just, I don't know.
And that's,
but yeah.
No, but that's even just that's from an archival point of view. I think the other thing that we have to worry about a lot of times is within paper conservation, there's so many different forms of paper artwork. And that's where, when you were saying the dust, there's a lot of instances where artwork of all materials collects dust, but it has to, especially with modern works, it has to do with that's what the artist wanted. And then it's like, okay, how do we manage that, and how do we manage the expectations of the museum versus or the person who owns it versus what the artist wanted, and in the aging process. I mean, there's so many cases like this that we're constantly kind of scratching our heads at and looking at in a way precedents of what's happened before. Yeah. So.
And I guess oxidation also may be a factor that the creator of an art object was, counting on to change the object over time. So if some conservator decides to remove oxidation from the object, it just ruins the idea of the creator or something like that.
I recently actually talked to a conservator who, like an older conservator, who mentioned that there was a drawing that they had cleaned, which was like a early 19th century drawing, which had a huge fleck of iron in the paper, and it was causing this horrible oxidation. And the person, I think museum involved, was like, get it out. And so they did. And now, like, that person was saying, they look back on that like a cringe moment of like, oh, oops. They look at it like a cringe moment of like, oh God, like, why did I do that? I shouldn't have done that. But at the time, it's what was done. So yeah, we can't really look back and judge, and we hope that people don't look back at us and judge.
They will, but
Yeah, no, I know.
Absolutely will.
We're the judgiest.
Angelina, you mentioned that there's lots of information potentially available from analyzing dust. Could you perhaps give some examples? Because I only know of examples from parchment conservation, when they use special sticky tape and then just to clean it, and then they analyze it for DNA and stuff. I don't know the details, but I know that they can determine lots of things about the history of the use of the book, where it was made, where it traveled, who used it, how often.
Yeah, that's the biopoliticology thing, research. There's nothing that comes particularly in mind. I think I've just been reading a lot, and it's always mentioned about just the fact that we remove the dust might contain so much information about it. And also it's just part of the object, not necessarily about the information that it contains. It's part of the object itself, because it has collected it, and it environmental things. And I think you learn a lot about, oh goodness me, think is a lot about the environment and understanding that how the environment of the time was and what was happening at the time. But at the moment, I can't remember exactly what it is. So yeah, don't quote me on that.
I remember another example where just the distribution of dust between the pages can tell you about the pattern of use, which parts of the books were most read, which is also an interesting source and also part of the history of the object.
For an example that I know of is, you know, in when they used to write, when they used to use like Arungol ink and ink in general to write, there was this powder or sand material that was used to dry the ink. So, you know, you would open a letter and this would drop out. However, like throwing that away is basically a crime. It is part of the history of the object itself, like that, the powder that was used. I don't remember the name, but that is also one thing that just comes in mind, because, you know, when I opened a letter once and I saw that, I was like, I didn't know what it was. I threw it away. I thought it was nothing, but, you know, considering from the things that I've learned so far, that happened like quite a few years ago. Now I'm just thinking like, oh my God, why did I do that? Like, I can't do these things. Like I hadn't considered what this meant, because in my mind, I could not understand what it was used for because I hadn't seen this before. But, you know, just thinking back, I'm just, you know, astonished by the fact that I did not think about that and just disposed of it. But that contains information.
That's a huge thing that I think our entire lives are spent putting lots of things in little baggies to make sure that we can preserve them to study them later, because we may not study them immediately, but they are super important. I mean, I'm just thinking back to the sheer amount of like, well, mold, which has been like the theme of this year for us. And, and also quite a number of books at institutions I've worked at before where they figured out the entire history of the book from the dust that's in between the guards. And it's from the foresight of those conservators who, again, like they had that experience of throwing it out before and then being like, oh, that would have had information. And then now being like, save it. So vital. So yeah, it's always little Ziploc bags filled with dust.
Yeah.
And in doing that, are you following your own practice, or is there an agreed upon set of protocols in individual organization or in the field in general? Say archives, I presume, or libraries are interested in keeping.
Yes, I think it depends on the sheer amount of, well, it depends on the capacity of each institution to continue that research, because there are lots of you know, institutions that the content is more important than the object itself, I think is one big thing to think about. And then also there's the concept of institutions that don't have access to that detailed of scientific research capabilities. Sorry?
Or even the equipment.
Yeah, and the equipment and things like this. So it's, I mean, there is a lot that has to go into that. But if you do, like, I mean, generally, that's what we would learn in school. That's probably what's considered best practice. And then once a treatment is complete, or once an assessment is complete, and you have all these little bags, if the, you know, you then ask whoever the stakeholder is to say, you know, do you have this ability to research this further? Would you like to? I mean, there could be some really interesting stuff that you find out. And yeah, I don't know. It's like I'd say it's 50-50. I'm not always on the research side. I am the one handing the bags to the scientists to put in their machines to do this incredible kind of assessment. But yeah, it really just depends on a case-by-case basis. And it is best practice to save things, that's for sure. Best practice to save and then ask later than, you know, be posed with, hey, did you save all that dust? And you're like, oh no.
True.
I definitely have this feeling that in the past few years, some attitudes have changed. And this is something that we discussed with one of our previous guests, Brenda Gallagher. She's a bookbinder and book artist, but she also knows some things about book restoration, book conservation, and we talked that modern approach is to understand that some 20, 50, 100 years from now, another conservator may work with your object, and you have to preserve as much for this future conservator. Not only the object itself, but as much of additional things and information and stuff attached to this object, so to make their work easier.
Yeah, documentation is key, really key. Yeah, I really can't, I don't think we can stress it enough. Take all the notes you possibly can when treating things, because it will help somebody in the future. It'll help your client currently. It'll help the institution with things and research in the future. I mean, the sheer amount of information that we can get from a single object that has a lot of real world, modern, present day implications is huge as well. I think, especially in private conservation, there's a lot of dismissive kind of behavior around documentation, not from the conservator side, but from whoever is receiving that documentation. I mean, I have a lot of clients who I can definitely say are just like, do I really need this like 8-page report with all of these pictures? And I'm like, you need it. You need it. You need it. Keep it, file it somewhere important. It's good for insurance purposes. It's good for further research in the future. It's good for provenance. It's good for, I mean, there's so many different reasons why it's important to keep that documentation and to have that kind of like, somebody in the future is going to look at this mentality. Like it's vital. Like so vital. If there's one thing you take away from this, it's like keep all your reports.
Could you perhaps give some example of an object that you worked with and while studying it and documenting in detail, discovered something of its provenance?
Yeah. Well, recently, gosh, which one do I even want to start with? I mean, I feel like this year has been a huge reckoning of documentation for sure. There was, well, I guess the best actually is probably something that I did for an institution. Unfortunately, I can't, because of the nature of the private conservation, most of the things that we work with are pretty confidential, so we can't express directly, everything that we've worked on and name names. But I worked on a photographic collection, and that was purely just doing, it was like a private family collection, and I was just doing a rehousing process. And in the process of doing this and documenting it, we found out that one of the family members who was doing most of the photography had an exceptional photographic collection, including a camera that was made and kind of like signed underneath, like inscribed by, not underneath, inside, by a rather famous photographer. And inside of there, they inscribed it in such a way that every time they took a picture, it was like a signature that came up. It was incredible. I've never seen anything like this. I told the PMG, the Photographic Materials Group of ICON, and we kind of all had this discussion of like, but how, was this a common practice? Like, was this something like a specific signature by this one artist this one photographer who, is an early 20th century photographer of kind of like very standard portraits, like family portraits. You go over to their studio, you sit and you take a picture kind of thing. And it was just really amazing. And not only that, but we found out that photographic studio, that photographer studio, the first one he had, was down the street from the family home of the client who I was working with. So then they were like, yeah, they were basically our neighbors and we were their test subjects. And that's how we got all this free photography in like 1905. And I was like, this is just amazing. So you get this whole new world that you've looked at. And at first they didn't want a report. So then I convinced them that they really needed a report. and they ended up sending that report to the estate of this photographer. And it's like still an ongoing thing at the moment. So yeah. You never know what you find. It's really important to keep your documentation.
Yeah, interesting. We sort of rushed into this discussion of conservation. And I still wanted to return to your roots, I guess, and your education. And how did you get to become a paper conservator? Because I guess it's a very special trait. And well, how do you get there? So can you tell a bit about your education and your past experience, and why did you choose this profession?
You're up first, Angie.
I've got the longest story, I think.
I don't know.
We'll find out. I like to talk. So yeah, well, I'll tell you what. I bumped into conservation by accident. That's how it happened for me. I originally wanted to be, well, when I was young, I wanted to be, an archaeologist. However, my mom kindly nudged me and she said, you know what, it's a very expensive profession and it's not really good for you. So I was like, okay, fine, I'm going to be an architect. Didn't work out. Anyway. However, accidentally, I found that there was this school in Athens that is called Conservation of Antiquities and Works of Art. It was a 5-year. Now we used to be a technological institute. Now it's a conservation. It's a proper uni institute. So that's changed. So yeah, I started with that. I thought, you know what, let's just try it. I thought it sounded exciting, and it did contain archaeology and things like that I was like absolutely smitten with. Yeah, first semester starts with history and archaeology and things like that. Second semester we start with conservation of paper, with conservation of what else did I do? I did paintings conservation, like easel paintings and panel paintings. What else did we do? Wood conservation, wood identification. Yeah, anyway, so every semester I kept like falling more and more in love with it. So I continue with that. I did work mostly with paintings, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to continue working with paintings. But then I thought I'll just do a master's degree, again on art, on something, but I chose art on paper. So that's how I ended up in London. The reason why I chose London is another story, but you know, whatever. But yeah, basically I started studying in 2005, if I'm right. So yeah, and in 2012 I started, I think it was September 2012 that I got in London, studied at Camberwell College of Arts in art on paper conservation. They have books as well, but I preferred the art on paper. So then I did that. That's where I met Ashleigh, actually. That's how our story just connects. And then I was basically directly after uni, I was employed in a public institute, which and I'm still there. I can't really say much about that. But like Ashleigh, like part of her story is that she went back to the US, but when she came back, she built, because it's all her, like I have to say, like I am just a mascot at this point. She started the Conservators, and I basically work with I work with paper, of course I do, I still do, but part of our collaboration, let's say, is also I do some paintings conservation, like on the side, because these things do crop up. I don't do extensive treatments, but yeah, it's just part of it. Oh yeah, I forgot where you were working when we started this. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So yeah, I think that's me so far. I keep doing, like I love conservation. I still do it. I still learn about it. And I do a lot of art on the side. That's just my thing.
Yes, she does. She does a lot of art on the side. It's really nice. It's super nice art.
I've tried a lot of things. I've tried lino printing, which I still kind of do sometimes. I've done some bookbinding actually, because that was also part of my studies in Greece. So I do have that, but I don't do like binding conservation because I didn't study it. I know how to bind books, I know how to make it, but not really how to do the whole treatment. So that's that.
It would be great if you can send us some of the photos of the things you made.
Yeah, of course.
Because yeah, we would be glad to share them as an announcement of this podcast. And
They're
I'll tell you
so
what,
nice.
I've got this that I bound the other day. Well, the other day. It's just a Coptic
yeah,
stitch. It's nothing.
Coptic stitch, yeah.
Yeah, nothing major, but yeah, I quite enjoyed these. This was like some painting paper that I had, and I just like to do it. Clear my mind. So
we were just discussing with Pavel that our today's guests are a bit further from our usual, cohort of guests who are mostly bookish people and bookbinders. Yeah, still.
Just kidding.
Still bookbinders, yeah.
There's still one little part. Yeah, I started it just to help my. I think just to relax, because I love that the stitching, it really relaxes me, and it really helped me. I was really depressed at some point, and I had to do something, so I started that. I remembered what I was taught in Greece, and I was like, okay, we'll do that. So I just started, and it really helped. But it's more artistic than it.
She's definitely the book cleaning person. I was like, oh, a stitch, because everyone here is like a Coptic stitch, and I was like, oh, that's nice. So yeah.
It is also very impressive that following your story, we can see that you weren't afraid to switch paths from time to time, and change areas of study, and this is truly impressive, because I don't know, in my experience at least, I was stuck with computer science for so many years that it's well, it's an old story as well. But it was a troubling moment of my life, definitely. Yeah, we also just had a bookbinder from Athens. We recorded with him just a week ago. Dimitris could. I'm sorry, I wouldn't butcher his surname once again, but his on Instagram is Dimitris Kauts or Dimitris Kuts, and he's a very nice binder, and I don't know if you saw him or his works.
No, I will try and catch the episode. I hadn't had time. It's been quite a busy few weeks.
It wouldn't be published until March or something, because we just recorded it, and yeah, it usually takes a couple of weeks before we edit it, and the scheduling allows to publish the new one. So I guess we're moving to Ashleigh now.
Yes. So I got into paper conservation because I was very fortunately like aware of it from kind of young age, because I think nobody really knows what it is until you get to university and people are talking about careers and things. But I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C., and there are a lot of museums in Washington, D.C., including the Smithsonian Institution, which is actually a collection of like 11 museums that are all, for the most part, free. So it's everybody's school trip all the time. It's what you do on the weekends. And so I was going to museums quite often, and I knew that I wanted to work like with art, and my parents were like really like, no, just not why. And so they were supportive though. They were like, okay, you have a talent in this. Like as an artist, I was really into drawing, I was really into painting. And they were like, but you're really good at math and science. So like, can you please like maybe consider doing something in math and science? And I was like, absolutely not. And I wanted to do art history. And I ended up in the UK because I have relatives there. I had gone for a few summers, and I was applying to schools in the US, and they still are extortionate. So I thought, let's just see, what are the prices in England? What should maybe I should try. And I ended up going to University of Manchester because they had a really, really interesting art history program, very like British focused at the time, but which sounds a bit strange, but it was a focus of kind of the creation of the RA, because at the time, I think like 17th and 18th century England was really focused on practical matters, not so much on art. But it became really apparent how much art actually contributed to a lot of practical things like land ownerships, horses, the sheer amount of horse paintings these people have, like a lot of things to do with portraiture and status and things like this. And all of it became like a language and very much formalized at one point. And I found that all really interesting because as much as I don't think that everything should have like a taxonomy and like it should be so rigidly organized, it does help quite a lot. And it gave me a really good insight to a kind of random field, especially since my background was all mostly math and science. But anyway, to cut it back, kind of long story short, I really still wanted to do conservation, and I was becoming more and more interested in it. And my parents were like, look, the thing is, we only let you do this art history degree because like it's your bachelor's degree. For your master's, we'd like you to do something a little more practical, something that involves these other skills that you have. And I was like, well, it's funny you say that, because conservation is a lot of science, more so than I even expected. So I ended up going to Camberwell, where I met Angie, and we, I just really enjoyed it. I liked working with my hands. I liked the science. I liked the science so much. I wasn't even that great at it, but I really loved it a lot. And it really pushed me to kind of be interested in research in general. But when I graduated, I, like many other foreign students, had to go back to their home country. And I went back and worked at Smithsonian for a little while with absolutely excellent conservator, Janice Ellis, at the American History Museum, the National Museum of American History. And I highly recommend you talk to her as well, because she's a great, great book conservator, an absolute legend and a very nice person. And she gave me a lot of advice on how to go about conservation from a private perspective. Because I think in Europe, there's a lot of emphasis on working at institutions. I mean, in general, I think the dream is to work for an institution, but that's not always the case for everyone. And when I came back to England, I finally got my visa in order, and my partner is here, who I'd been with since then. We were living in London, and it was really difficult to find a conservation position after being away for nearly 2 years. So I took a series of very strange jobs, all in the arts, that I, like, Angie's like trying really hard not to laugh because they were really strange. All of my alumni were like, what are you doing? So I worked as a PA and collection manager to an ultra high net worth individual, which means a billionaire. And I helped him manage his collection to a certain extent and do research and things. But it was also as a personal assistant position, which was wild. And then I worked as the head of conservation at John Jones, which was quite famous conservation framer. Yeah, conservation framer, mount maker, plinth maker, like anything you needed for presentation of an artwork, you could go to them. And I worked for them basically in the last year and a bit of their existence, because they have since closed, unfortunately. And that was also a wild job, because it's looking at conservation from both a private perspective and from within a framer's. So it's all to do with exhibition design. So it was like a really big crash course into private everything to do with art. And it really is like much more than just, the actual information, the beauty of the artwork, the conservation science and research. Like suddenly you're smacked with like insurance and the economics and the logistics and customs and all of these really very intensive, like financially intensive motives for why things happen within the arts and how that works with institutions as well. And that made me kind of convinced to stay in the private sector, because it is like the wild, wild west. It's really, really strange. And I think good. It's a good learning curve. But yeah, and yeah.
No, I just I wasn't sure whether I should mention JJ, but yeah, that's how I got into this. Ashleigh would call me for paintings, consultations, and things like that, and that's how it got going, let's say.
Yeah, and I should say the calls were definitely like somebody FedExed something from like Miami and put their foot through it, but it was a painting, help. Or like, it was always these like horrible situations. And I think that's one thing that private sector conservation gives that museums cannot, which is the weirdest, strangest issues of damage and the strangest questions that clients bring. I mean, the first question I got really in the first month of being on the job was if I wanted to go to a lecture series, not even a lecture series, like a workshop at the Maritime Museum in Greenwich in England, in London, about artwork on yachts, because we had several clients who had yachts that they wanted to put like £1 million drawings on, including one who wanted to put it on their yacht, but like in the pool. So when they're swimming, they could see it in the, like, I can't make this up. So it's amazing. It's a really fun, terrifying world to work in.
I guess there may have been some Russian. Sorry, Pavel.
Well, they do say that Salvatore Mundi spent at least a few months.
It did.
On the
I'm
yacht.
not even going to say how I know that.
When you think about it, I mean, $500 million, 15th century paint, and you.
I mean, the worst question of it, because I was saying the same thing, and then my friend who works as a gallerist was like, "You think that's the question? The real question is, how do you even explain that to your insurer? In fact, who do you get to insure £500 million on £500 million on water? Like, how do you do this?" And that's something that I think is a bit of a bad thing within the private sector, is that you start thinking about it from that monetary point of view quite a lot. And obviously the loss of Salvatore Mundi would have been, like, if anything had happened to it, would have been a loss for humanity. But at the same time, it also is a very calculable financial loss. And it's like, how do you even do that? How does one even go about calculating these things? So I'm glad I don't work in insurance, but I work with a lot of insurers and I know enough to stay away.
And speaking of insurance and conditions, I assume that after spending lots and lots of money on conserving books and papers and maps, people then keep what they receive from you in much better conditions than before.
You should hope.
Or don't they?
We should hope. Yeah. I mean, they certainly don't always keep their reports. So that's, strike number one. I think for the most part, I think Angie and I are, well, I don't know if I'm scary enough. I don't know if I impose enough to them the importance of this. Like, a lot of times I feel like a bit of a mom being like, make sure you take care of it better and all this kind of stuff. But no, I think the price of conservation, when you start talking about the financials of things, I think that's usually what gets them a bit awake and worried and concerned and ready to take care of things more. But the flip side also exists, which is where we have a lot of people who, are really scared, like too scared to display things, too scared to to turn their air conditioning on, like they're too scared to do things to such an extent because they went down the same rabbit hole that we go down, but they obviously don't understand it as well as we do. So I had a client who knew about PD 5454, which is like a standard of, it's a standard, it's an ISO created in London, and it basically describes the conditions in which most museums should be storing, displaying, everything. It's just like the environmental conditions, and they had access to it somehow, and they read it and were terrified that like their paintings were going to melt off the wall. And I was like, it's not that deep, guys. It's gonna be okay. But it was 2 hours spent, at their house on a Thursday night being like, don't worry, it's gonna be okay.
As long as there's no direct sunlight on your painting, you should be fine.
You've got like 8 layers of UV protection on your sunroof because you just were that scared it's gonna be okay. I mean, trust me, like it's okay. So yeah.
With people who are getting terrified, it sometimes gets really interesting because there is this whole group of people among bookbinders and book-related people who preach that all old books should be handled only in gloves. And then all professional book workers say that, well, yeah, there are certain occasions when you need to work with books in gloves, but on most occasions, gloves prevent you from feeling different things and working more precisely. So you have more chance to damage a book working in gloves than when working without gloves. So no, that's the wrong point of view, and you shouldn't just take it as a fact. But these people continue to pursue every post with professionals handling books without gloves, and this is wrong. You shouldn't do that.
There's definitely an attitude. Yeah, like there's such an attitude of that in so many things in books, and I would definitely say in photography. I've had a number of in photography, yes, it's important to have gloves, but like the gloves that some people show up with are not the gloves in question that they should use. So 100% cotton gloves, like, well, at times quite good. Then it's like, well, do you want to use like really kind of burnished gloves so you make sure you don't create scratches on the emulsion? You shouldn't be touching the emulsion anyway. Do you there's so many, like, it depends on the situation. And again, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, if you don't know what situation you're in, or you don't know, you don't have the training to do it, just don't do it. Somebody who does have the training will know how to do it and will be able to guide you. And you can call people. I mean, this is something that I think we get a lot of emails and calls about how best to handle something, where I'm like, look, I don't even need to go there. I can just tell you what to do. But it's that terrified feeling is really rough. In fact, the worst situation I had of it was one time at John Jones, where this guy had come in with one of the most incredible daguerreotypes of his family from Sweden in I think it's 18, it was really early daguerreotype. And he had kept it in the dark in a closed room because it had kind of split from its frame. There was some kind of damage to it, and it was no longer sealed. So he was really afraid of the light, but he didn't think about the oxidation. So he left it in this room unsealed for, I think it was 10 years, and then brought it to us and was like, I don't know why it's still fading. Is it just because it's old? I don't understand what's going on with this mirroring. And I had to tell him, it's good that you kept it in the dark, but you should have brought it to somebody, because at this point it's already too far gone to really preserve. And there were faces just completely gone at that point. And so we did our best to seal it and then reframe it in a way where it had a little curtain. It was really cute. It was really nice because he was still scared about the light. We were like, I don't think the light would have done as much as the air did. So
And it's also
So
like
yeah,
temperature and whatnot. So there's a lot of things that contribute to.
yeah.
If I may, I would like to come back to one of the comments you made about not being taken seriously. It reminds me of one of the interviews we made recently with Katie Abbott, conservator from London, who started back in the 80s when it was a really male-dominated world, and they really wanted her to do the stitching. They didn't take her as a bookbinder seriously, and it took her years and years to rise in their eyes. So she had to work even harder than the man. Would you say that changed by now? How much better is the situation?
Well,
And is it different in the conservation area? Because what was special about Kathy's stories is that she came into bookbinders workshop where there were like 60 men, and women only did sewing of books. But is there any difference in conservation field?
well, it's mostly girls now. Which is,
I think though, paper conservation is mainly girls. However, I think with the bookbinding, there's still a little bit of an issue because still it was considered as a man's job to be a bookbinder. And you'll find that there's more men bookbinders than women. Like my teacher in Greece was a man. Like I didn't, he was not like, he was obviously not a woman. He was a man that was doing like the binding. And he was teaching us about paper conservation as well. So I think that might still be around, but there's a lot of girls, there's a lot of women working in conservation and way less men. So in Greece, we divided, we didn't start with many boys when we started in that semester when I did. We had about 6 of them, and it was 20 plus people in total. So about six boys. So first couple semesters, it was mainly theoretical, and then we would divide into say either the antiquities or the works of art. And guess how many went to the works of art and how many went to antiquities, which contained metal and glass and ceramics and all the like things that you have to carry things around. So we had 2 of them we kept, and everybody else just went to the other side. So this in paper, like it's it's way less. And
I'm surprised that those 2 went.
Yeah. I think we had 2, and of course others from other semesters, but I think from our semester, I think it was just two guys.
I think in Camberwell there was 1. He was like our token boy.
Often it's like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think as well in conservation as a whole, there definitely that kind of like slightly sexist attitude still exists, because at least in the US, most of the conservators who I worked with, be it in like DC or New York, definitely had like, there's a complex I think that they have in the US about it being very scientific and expressing everything with a hugely vast chemical knowledge, which I think is amazing. But I've been told, and I have noticed that it definitely stems from this concept of like conservators pre-1980 were considered basically cleaners. Like you were just a really good cleaner, or like a collection manager or custodial kind of concept, which is weird because like it had like a big spike in like the like early 20th century. There was a lot of very famous collection managers, curators, and conservators who were kind of emerging, and not proper conservators, restorers, but at the time that was what it was. And then this kind of decline, and I don't know why. I've never found out myself, but yeah, there's definitely that attitude, and it comes a lot with that whole the fact that conservation studios within institutions are usually in basements for protection of objects from light and things like that. But that's where most custodial services happen as well. Logistics, everything like that. So at least when I was at Smithsonian, it was like us, the photography studio, exhibition design, like as in paper conservation, and all the different conservation groups. and then janitorial services. And then you would go upstairs and like see the light, and that's where like the curators live. And it was this very like weird upstairs, downstairs kind of vibe. I don't know if that's really sexist. That's just more the attitude of being taken seriously. But yeah, so I think that probably contributes a lot to that whole ethics discussion of like really trying to explain and be proper in our method so that we can, you know, really not just be putzing around cleaning stuff. It's a little bit more detailed than that.
Yeah, it certainly is more like we have to explain ourselves, or not explain ourselves, but we have to justify.
That's a lot of explaining.
Yeah, but I think for better word, I think it's just justify our existence as conservators, just to, because people are like, what are you doing? Who are you, and why are you telling me that this has to happen this way?
Why do you get to touch stuff? Why do you get to touch it? Always a question.
Oh yeah, I love it. That's another reason why I love going to conservation, because I got to touch stuff.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest reason why we went into this. We got to touch the stuff
because, you know, like, I'm the conservator. I get to handle this, and you don't.
Yeah, but there's a lot of chemical, like, I mean, the thing is, it's like, okay, you get to touch the art. Why? It's like, because I had to endure, you know, organic chemistry to know how to touch this thing, to like really be allowed. Like, it comes with its drawbacks at times, but it's still very, very satisfying. So.
And to go back to the whole glove situation, if your hands are clean, I don't see why you can't handle something. As long as your hands are clean and washed, like, it's fine. And
this really is like COVID. It's like, just wash your hands. Just wash your hands.
Yeah.
And then just don't touch your face.
Yeah.
Exactly. After you touch the object, don't lick your fingers, and don't touch your face, because, well,
oh god,
yeah,
there may be poison on this old book.
Yeah.
I was just reading this blog about biocodicology, actually, just this morning, and they were saying that on this book they found, aside from human DNA, they also found Streptococcus and another microbe that causes acne. So I'm like, basically, yeah, you touch and I was just thinking about pimples popping on my face. Like, this is just and Staphylococcus, which is like horrendous. And so, you know, you just just hands, and again, just wash it after handling the document, especially if it's not clean. But,
and one last thing I will say about the whole concept of you know, justifying conservation and things like that. It has been a serious problem, I would say, until this year. Because this year, no museums were open. Lots of people had the time at home to go through their storage, or they didn't have the time to access things that were being transported or were in storage elsewhere. And when they finally were out of lockdown and were able to see things, I mean, the sheer number of emails that we received, like, I'd say mid-June, from people being like, oh my God, there's this thing growing on this paper. What is it? What is this? Am I in trouble? And I was like, yeah. You are, yes, of course, it's mold. They're like, oh my God, why? And I was like, well, these are the reasons why. I mean, like, literally, Angie knows my whole summer was spent like wearing a mask, like not just in daily life, but I had like a HEPA filter, you know, double-sided filter mask. I'd say 50% of the time in the studio, if not at times 80%, because everything coming in was mold. And mold is incredibly harmful. If you're ever working with mold, please take the appropriate steps to take care of yourself. You can die. It's incredibly harmful, especially because most of the mold that grows on complex materials, such as paper, books, things with many different types of materials in it, all degrading at different rates, organic materials, and at times, to a certain extent, inorganic, can kill you. So please be careful. But trying to explain that to people was probably the first time where everyone was like, oh, I'm so glad I called you. And I was like, wow. No one's ever that happy to talk to a conservator. Yay. So yeah, now I think we're in a bit more of high demand because people realize it's very important to look after their stuff.
Speaking of mold, can absolutely any mold be removed, or are there types that are just too dangerous? One historical anecdote from Russia comes to mind. As you know, in the center of Moscow, on the Red Square, there is the mummy of Lenin.
Yes.
Yeah. And
I know this.
yes, and it's been lying there for almost 100 years now. Since he was put in there, an institute was founded to look after him and later after mummies of other communist leaders. And back in the 60s, a new type of mold they never encountered before started to grow on the leader of the worldwide revolution. They collected it and sent it to an institute without telling the source of the mold. And in a month, they are said to have received the following answer: extremely dangerous, impossible to remove, do burn the object.
So things I found out about mold this year. I really feel like this should be like a whole blog post or something. Things I found out about mold this year. One, no mold can be fully removed. So yeah, it's not even a question of like it cannot be removed. It's like none of it can be removed. It is eternal. I'm sure you've seen loads of these documentaries about like the largest organism on earth is fungi. Wow. It's like I literally didn't eat mushrooms until like recently because the concept terrifies me of these. It's like a sentient, non-sentient being. Like they're terrifying. And they communicate and they lie dormant. That's the word for mold. So when it's not moist, it lies dormant. So the issue at hand is not so much what you can do to get rid of it, because you can't. What you can do is in what specific situation you've got, can you do to make this thing become dormant? As I found out this summer, a lot of those things are conflicting. I would be asking Angie for advice with something, and then other conservators for advice with something, and then biological specialists about like for a particular project, like, well, what do I do? And some people would say, oh, dry it. Some people would say, oh, seal it. But like it might get humid. They're like, but seal it. It's better to seal it than to dry it. And some people said to dry it than to seal it. And really what I learned,
it has to be dry.
And this will literally divide conservators and biologists. Like it's not even just us, it's everyone. Everyone's like, how do we deal with this thing? And I watched a documentary about some mummies that really gave me great insight this summer, which was that, okay, so it's really gross, but like athlete's foot is a type of fungus, right? And it is present, living, thriving, living its best life on the feet of some of the early dynastic Egyptian mummies. So you have a dead thing with dead flesh, but the fungi is still alive. And so, and like it's catching, like somebody could catch, athlete's foot from a mummy. Like it's, and in that documentary, the archaeologist in question was basically saying, it really did, like, should we seal it off to protect ourselves or like, to decontaminate it? And this biological specialist they had said, no, the best thing you can do is desiccate it. You can try your best to seal it off, but if you do that, do know you can never open it again. Like it's the best relationship they gave was basically if you have a slice of, if you have bread that's gone off, don't open the bag. If you can see the mold present there, don't open the bag and stick your head in and be like, is it moldy? Like, just, it's done. Just keep it sealed, throw it away. Like, that's it. If you must open it, the steps to take are desiccate it with everything you possibly have. If it's still alive, hoover it with an appropriate hoover that's not going to just extract and send it out into the world. If you, have a mask on, have gloves on, make sure you're wearing clothes that are not, like wear an apron, wear something to cover yourself. God forbid you're one of the people working on Lenin's body, like cover yourself, cover the whole red square. Like they move incredibly fast. They're airborne. They're, they're really dangerous. And in that case, I would say like the best thing I think they did maybe the best thing possible, which is to leave it perfectly sealed. It is that slice of moldy bread. Don't open it. Don't let it get open. Seal it. Make sure it stays sealed. And hopefully over time, maybe it'll become like a slightly anoxic environment, and that will cause it to become dormant anyway. It'll breathe too much in the space because fungi breathes. So it will, breathe all the air in the space it's allotted if it's well sealed, and then fingers crossed.
Just go to sleep.
Yeah, it'll become dormant, and then maybe you can handle it. But even then, as soon as it's open to, fresh, beautiful, slightly moisturized Russian air, it's like, it's on again. Like I actually, it's funny because my husband is really into Russian history and stuff. And I think he mentioned this article, like he mentioned an article that was talking about this, where he was like, there's like some weird mold. And I remember being like, I don't want to hear it. I've had enough of mold. Like, I don't want to talk about mold. So yeah, mold. Mold.
So here we are talking about the real curse of the mummy, because it's like
they're like, oh, I've been poisoned. It's like, no, you just breathed in some black mold on a mummy's foot. Like, ugh, gross. And on a serious note, I mean, I do know a conservator I worked for in America knows someone who died from an excavation of a ship that he had been working on, and retrieved a book that was half submerged in water that had mold growing on the very specific animal glue that was on the binding. And I think he died in like 2 weeks. It's really serious. Mold will live far beyond us, far beyond cockroaches, far beyond atomic bombs. It's ugh, mold.
I mean, maybe an atomic bomb will desiccate it forever. You never know.
I don't know. There's mold growing in Chernobyl that has not changed since before Chernobyl. Like, it doesn't show radioactivity. It beat the radioactivity. It's like, it terrifies me. This is the stuff that keeps me up at night.
There also is some moss there. They decided to test it on International Space Station because it's not its radioactivity, but it absorbs radioactivity, and they thought they can try to make panels with this moss and to protect astronauts from the space radiation. And well, Chernobyl helps our spacemen.
Great. That just sits there and makes me think like there's just going to be some horrific horror movie with mold that attacks the space station, and then it's just a mold in space going. Anyway, sorry, mold. I get.
I'm quite happy that you mentioned your time working at John Jones, because the thing that we discussed with once again to mention her with Katie Abbott is that she had spent some time working for an antique book dealer, and she told us that it's interesting and strange how book dealers and conservators and bookbinders, bookmakers have absolutely different languages when they are speaking about the same objects, about the same books, about the same parts of the book or something like that. And I guess your experience also gives you some insight in how different people, different professionals use different language, and a language definitely affects how we think about some objects and how we value them. And what's your experience with that?
I think for us, the biggest issue was, well, there was like a lack of knowledge of types of paper, but that I think is pretty standard across people not in conservation or bookbinding who aren't familiar with different types of paper and old paper. But I think the weirdest thing was kind of relearning the language of mount making that framers use, that was quite intensive actually. And what was really cool about John Jones is that their mount makers, they really, they wanted to make sure they were people who had like a BA, like a bachelor's degree or some type of postgraduate diploma or some experience working in conservation and a knowledge of conservation so that they could be better suited to do the mount making. But they also really there's like this series of books, I'm gonna have to look it up. It's like, they're written by a conservator, a very well-known conservator, Angie, like, I think it's like, it's not the history of mount making, but it's like mounting artworks on paper, I think is the title of the book. But it's like a series of 2 or 3 books, and they all had to read that. And so they had this really specific knowledge of vocabulary of mount making, but that wasn't always used amongst other framers. So then when I worked with other framers, I'd say like, oh, it's this kind of a mount. And they'd be like, oh, what? And they'd say something and I'd say like, oh, that's what I thought it was, but okay. But other than that, no, it was pretty, I don't know, did you feel it was any different?
No, I think, well, the only thing for me is that people confuse acrylics with oils and vice versa. We get that. I get that a lot. Like, it's like, no, this is like an oil, it's on whatever, or they just always say acrylics, and I'm like, this is not an acrylic. Anyway, that happens. I mean, I think for me, because I was educated in 2 different countries, the main quite interesting just to transfer. Like the first year in because Camberwell was 2 years, our studies. The first year I spent in Camberwell was basically relearning everything that I had learned about paper conservation, but just turning it into English. So because I already knew the first year material, I had already learned it in Greece, so I knew all of it. It was just like a retraining, but in a different language. So that was quite interesting. And now I don't have any terminology in Greek. I forgot all of it. And whenever I speak with Greek conservators, I just have this like, oh, how do you say that in Greek? And they just look at me in a face like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Who are you, little pretentious person? Like, but I just have nothing. So yeah.
It's funny actually, because the other thing is also with materials. Like I had to have that moment from US to UK. And now I've kind of been stuck in France for the past 2 months, and I've met up with some conservators, and you know, I've been looking into like certain materials for people, and I don't know any
Sorry,
of
I
them.
said, like, I don't think you're like stuck in France. Oh yes, Ashleigh.
It's
Sorry.
really nice. No, but it's nice, but also like kind of scary. It's weird. It's weird as well, because like I've been joking. I'm like housewifing it because obviously I can't do much work because I don't have a studio. So I've just kind of been meeting with conservators and talking with them and talking with people and talking and sending emails and preparing for people to send art to us and talking some more. And it's been this weird like 2 months, especially living out of a suitcase. So there's that too. It's been like, we planned for 10 days for like Christmas holiday, and like, here we are in February. But no, yeah, I don't know any materials. Like I don't know, it took me so long to relearn, you know, what is the American version of Bondina? What's the American version of Melanex, Mylar? Like it's all these different types of things. And then certain materials aren't available in the UK because understandably it's an island. So they get, it's kind of limited how you can source materials. And so things that would be amazing to use in the US, I'm like, where's the multi-sorb? But the multi-sorb is great for, you know, like blotter washes. And they're like, what is multi-sorb? And I'm like, no, like there's a lot of stuff that requires a lot of extra planning, but no, I didn't, other than that, yeah, I mean, Angie had the worst of it trying to translate all of it. So
yeah, but thankfully this did not create any issues with putting it in words, I suppose, somewhere. But yeah.
I guess I had a bit similar experience with bookbinding because I when I started studying bookbinding, I mostly used English language books. So most of the terminology I used and I knew were from these books. And then I went to United States to study for some time. And so I got even more English language terminology. And I also had my bookbinding courses in Moscow, where I had to teach in Russian language. And almost every lesson I had these moments when I was, well, in English, this process or this part of the book is called like this. I don't know its name in Russian. Sorry, you will have to deal with that. and this is awful, and especially when you are when you start to speak to some professionals, to book professionals, and you're like, okay, I don't know how this thingy is called in Russian, but you have to believe me that I'm a professional, that I know things I'm talking about.
Yeah. Exactly.
I remember you starting to buy old Soviet books on bookbinding, and finally discovering how all those tools are called.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I think I still have all my notes from Greece, so I can always just go back. But it's just so difficult. I've been here for so long, and I just, I have forgotten not half of my Greek. But if I don't use the language, it's really difficult to just, everyday speech is fine, but conservation stuff, like anything that has to do with my professional life, it's gone, because I speak the English part of conservation right now. So it's just quite.
But would there even be a job for you in Greece?
I don't know. I mean, I left with the intention to return, and there's museums. There is, like, I think there's I don't know about paper conservation, to tell you the truth, a lot, but I would have probably gone into more panel painting or painting conservation in any case. However, after finishing, I didn't feel like going back, and I just came back. I went for holidays and then just came back, and I got my job. I had an interview for my job, well, part of my job, that is not my job anymore, but it was like in August, and I started in October. So after that, I haven't been out of work since then. And most of my friends in Greece, either like the conservators that I know, like they're either doing something else, that, like, I know someone has become an actor, or they've gone into more architecture or something, or if they do conservation, they work only with like really short-term contracts, and they go around Greece. And it's fun, it's fine to do it for a little while, but if you don't have anything stable, it just gets a little bit tiring and everything, and it just takes a toll on you. And you need something that you can constantly know that you can provide for yourself, and especially if you have a family, what are you going to do? So yeah, I think there's a lot of issues with Greece, and how they're getting the contracts and whatnot, and it's also you have to apply, and you have to do all these things, and I don't even know, if I go back, if I even know how to do conservation in Greece. It's like, I don't even know how things work. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to say never, but I'm not really planning to go back for some time. And I've already been here almost like 9-10 years, and kind of tell you something.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you? And what about you, Ashleigh? Have you ever thought about coming back?
Well,
coming back from France.
Yeah, definitely back from France. No, I plan on coming back from France for sure. I'm still paying rent on my studio. I was like, wait a minute, I need to go. But no, well, okay, like I'll try and keep it short, because Angie knows I can definitely I can express quite an argument similar to what she was saying about the viability of working in conservation in both the UK and in the US. But in the US, it actually is pretty difficult. They have a very what sounds like a good system as far as education goes, which is that if you know, it's free to do conservation at an MA level for your master's, but it is a long wait list and a very small class size per year. I had an intern when I was working in New York for a very short contract, and that was must have been 2016, and she just completed her degree this year, so she didn't start it until last year. And she had gotten into the course already, and that's why she was a pre-program intern, but she had to be a pre-program intern at various places for like 3.5 years. So in a way, there's like, that's a bit of a problem. And I mean, other than the fact that the US is a flaming hot mess right now in general, it's not the most attractive to go back to. But I do want to, like, I will say, like, I always was open to going back for short-term contracts with institutions, because there was a weird period of the institutions in the US having like a really difficult structure of salaries. Again, there was this kind of like, curators were getting tons and tons of money, and conservators were getting very, very little. And so, and then departments were being downsized. It's not a cost-effective business. You're pouring money and materials and consumables into something that doesn't immediately have a good return, because you're obviously, you know, you're investing into an object. You're investing that time, that money, that treatment, the materials needed, chemicals, everything like that into this object's longevity, which, yes, from a financial point of view, can boost the popularity of the museum. It can boost the, you know, kind of collateral that sometimes museums have. But there was always that issue of like, museums don't sell art, so how are they making money if it's only through visitorship? All that kind of stuff just really compiled into this trend of museums downsizing their conservation studios. So the bad side is you don't have permanent jobs, but the plus side is you have really, really pretty decently paid private contracts that are short term. But if you don't mind, you know, hopping from one city to another, especially young, like post-program graduates, it can be pretty sweet. I knew of a few alumni from Camberwell who were American who did that. And yeah, it's not like you're not making millions, but to do what you want to do and still have savings, pay off your student loans, things like that, it's definitely viable. On the flip side, I have lots of thoughts about the UK system in itself. But I think that's like a whole nother bag. But yeah, I don't think I'm going back anytime soon. I think but that's more to do with just like the state of America. Sad times.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so neither of you are looking back, but what do you think of when you think of your future? What's next for you? What are your ambitions? Is this it? Is this how you're planning to live your life?
Yes. I don't know. I feel I'm Angie knows this. This is like, again, with that whole UK system thing, I'm on like a full-on crusade. I'm like on a full-on crusade to elevate the profession, because I think conservation is a field where we've been very peripheral for a very long time. We've been trying to justify the importance of saving these objects and saving these materials. And we don't have to justify that. It's obvious they should be saved. I mean, the sheer amount of knowledge that we have come across in the past 5 years alone in archaeology and conservation of previous civilizations' knowledge that now affects us and we benefit from, and that could have been lost to time, is ridiculous, like actually ridiculous. I could list the sheer number of scientific discoveries that have happened as of late, where people are like, oh yeah, there was that archaeologist who said that somebody in like 600 BC figured that out already. And it's like, wouldn't it have been nice if we could have just had a conservator, you know, treat that at an earlier period, and then we could have read that information and look, wow, innovation, like how great is that? An innovation from somebody else's research over 2,000 years ago, or over 1,000 years ago, or 100 years ago, or, you know, it doesn't matter when. All we have to do is look back. And that's what I think we as people who do conservation do, is to help people look back and reflect and find knowledge. But beyond that, we're really important for insurance, and we're really important in science. In insurance, the sheer amount of collateral that people put on art at the moment is insane. When you see these huge auctions for objects, I mean, those are objects that have a direct monetary value. People are taking care of them. People use them as collateral for things. They are very much a part of the economy. So it's really important to take care of those things, because it's the only type of material that you can lose, that you lose the whole value of once it's damaged. Like if you lose a couple of stocks, like you still have some stocks, but like this is a case of like, if you scratch a painting, like boom, what's the purpose of it anymore, you know? So, or if you tear apart a book that's like invaluable, or if you get it wet, you've lost that information. It's no longer of value. So there's a lot of stock in that. And on the science point of view, I think it's really important, because we are looking at materials and how they degrade and age, like most of the time older than 20 years. When you buy something, it's like, I've got a 10-year warranty. And that's just based on how much, you know, in a lab, they can do accelerated aging tests, tensile strength tests, like all these kinds of things in a controlled environment. So that's not even including the concept of pollution or other extenuating factors. And we're the only people who are looking at stuff and how it ages at a way later period. And I've heard of conservators working with ecologists, with material scientists, and most of those other scientific people are saying, I never really thought about what would happen when that adhesive on that tape degrades like that. Or I never really thought about what would happen when that particular plasticizer off-gassed after the 20-year mark, because we only look at the 10-year mark. And that is hugely influential to how we make future materials, it's so like prevalent right now with like climate change and how we make things and how we use energy and all that kind of stuff. A great example is solar panels. We thought they were super amazing. And then we started looking at how we make them and how they degrade. And in both of those instances, it's actually really quite damaging. So it's like, you know, maybe if we, you know, got out of our peripheral and we tried to really reach out to people in these other fields, be it financial or scientific, we could really help people and be, you know, regarded and you know, thought of as more worthy than we currently are as just people fixing stuff or cleaning stuff. But yeah, we could really contribute a lot as well. So that's my crusade. Join me in my quest of making conservation great again. I don't know.
You mentioned different consideration of different materials, and as far as I understand, the conservation of plastics also becomes a really troubling niche because some of them are degrading pretty fast, and many cultural and historical plastic objects start to degrade, and it's in some cases there is no real understanding how to prevent further degradation and to protect them.
Usually irreversible. So
it's typically irreversible. I mean, I think the first time people really started thinking about that was with like really high value artworks, like modern art, but also with money, because we make plastic money. So the first, I did like a whole conservation of the National Numismatic Collection. That was like the project I worked on at Smithsonian as like a freelance conservator. And it was incredible how much like research went into making durable, long-lasting plastic with durable, long-lasting ink. And the research is fascinating, and it never escaped and mostly in Australia, because that's where they make most plastic money, the Australian kind of treasury. you know, like nobody was really curious as to how they made this plastic or like why it was so durable or anything and what failures they came across at first. And it's actually a pretty cost-effective method of making this plastic. It's not really that harmful to the environment. It's recyclable, you know, but it took a long time to get there. And then we're making plastic that still is really crap. And it's like, well, you could have just, those guys really, they got tons of research papers that they all published about it. And they're really boring, but they're really important. So, you know, it's that concept of like, we just all need to kind of talk across fields to each other.
I wanted to ask you, why do you think conservators are not being listened to as much as they should do? Is it partly a class thing, particularly in UK?
I don't know if it's class. I think it's, I mean, like we have, what?
Culture.
Yeah. Because, yeah, it's like, I think we're still looked at as like kind of like we're nerdier than librarians, you know? So like people don't want to be lectured. And like I literally just gave you guys like my crusade lecture. So like all we ever do is lecture people. I'm like, actually, I don't know if you should do that. So like, I think a lot of people just get bored by us. I don't know how else to say it, which is sad. Ugh, it's really sad. It is a big hurdle, actually.
Is it currently a one-woman crusade, or is an organization, a campaign, a blog? How can people
join the crusade? No, it's not a one-woman crusade. There's actually a lot of work that like ICON has been doing and AIC have been doing to kind of and IIC, yeah, about the like, first off, starting with getting us paid better, which I think like within institutions, which is like a really big thing because that does become quite a classist issue globally. But then I think really the talking with other scientists and things, it's usually when a conservator has reached you know, a dead end in their chemical knowledge, which is hard, but like they'll reach a dead end in their chemical knowledge and have to call somebody. And then somebody's like, wait, what are you doing? Wait, why are you researching that? And then suddenly they've inspired someone to kind of get involved. And I know of a lot of conservators who that's the case of what happens with them. I think a great example of that is Melissa Lewis, who is an incredible conservator, used to work at the DNA, now runs her own practice of modern British conservation. And she'll never proclaim it herself, but she's really, really become quite innovative in ecological chemicals and ecological treatments that we can do as conservators. So trying to be less wasteful, trying to use chemicals that are safer for the environment. I mean, we use a lot of acetone, and that's not great. And so looking at alternatives to things like that, looking at alternative, safer lightning methods, not like bleaching, but actually lightning and things like that, which are really important. Like, I don't know anybody else who's really going and doing that. And she's working with a lot of scientists who are like, wow, maybe we should tell other people in other fields to do that. We're gonna get some people to give you a call. And, you know, it inspires people to do it. So it's, yeah, it usually starts with one project. Somebody has a project that's just, you know, can't do it themselves, they can't research it any further, and they need someone else. But yeah, I don't know. Well, it's not like a formal crusade. It's just like, it's just when I'm like, and another thing. So,
I really hope it will work out. I
hope so too. I think it would really help people.
Yeah, I think it's already happening anyway. Like there's more and more talks and more conversation, not conservation. People are being more open, and like conservators are looking more and more into sustainability and a lot, and how the materials we use, what kind of imprint they have and whatnot. So yeah, I think things are changing.
Yeah, they've definitely changed a lot so far. Yeah.
That's it for today. Thanks a lot to Angelina and Ashleigh. It was a great talk. I also would like to say thanks to our viewers and our supporters and our community, especially to people who support us on Patreon. Thanks to your pledges, we can cover expenses on editing these videos. We have a lot of ideas on how to improve and make our podcast bigger this year. We plan to invite a French-speaking co-host to talk to different professionals in France and other French-speaking regions of the world. So if you're able to support us, please consider doing that. Pledges start with only $1 or €1. And thanks again for watching. See you next time. Bye.
Hi, thank you.